Last week, though I guess the last 2 weeks, we worked through the book of Job. I'd shared a lot about the book of Job. Job, I find to be I've always been, brought to the book of Job. Early on, I think it's so fascinating. I hope, maybe in the last 2 weeks, maybe, you considered Job a little differently. I think if I had one message to share from the book of Job, it was the message from last week. So if you didn't hear that one, that if I could say anything from the book of Job, it surrounds that idea from the very end in chapter 42, where God, just a little recap, because as we are flowing into the next week, the Lord speaks, and he's speaking to the friends of Job. And he says, I'm angry with you and your two friends. And we discussed a little bit last week how the first read through, and a lot of translations have it, because you have not spoken the truth about me. You haven't said what is right about me, like my servant Job has. And how if you've been reading through the book of Job, that's kind of a confusing statement right there at the end. To be reading the book of Job, and then all of a sudden for the Lord to be saying to the friends, hey, you didn't talk about me right, like Job did. And he's upset with them. And that's very confusing. And I think it's because of a little bit of the grammar there, and a little bit of how it gets translated, a little bit what gets lost, because the friends said lots of nice things, in a sense, about God, and Job said some really terrible things about God. And so to, at the end, say, Job was saying correct things and you guys weren't, that should kind of throw you off, because again, we brought it out last week, it's Job who says that God is destroying, blameless, and wicked, and that God mocks at the destruction of the wicked. Job says that. Job says God is up there laughing and mocking the innocent people. Is that what God's doing? Job says that who should serve the Almighty? What would they gain by praying or praising Him? And it's Job that says, the groans of the dying rise from the city, and the souls of the wounded cry for help, but God charges no one with wrongdoing. Job is saying that God is mocking people, and that God has no justice, and that God doesn't care, and why would you pray to Him? And yet, if you read 42:7 like that, it says, like Job was speaking correctly about God. Was he? But God is still kind of saying that Job was doing something correctly and the friends weren't doing something correctly. And that's where that little grammar piece comes in, that it's probably better for it to be translated that you haven't spoken correctly to me. That Hebrew preposition is better translated to than of. You have not spoken correctly to me like Job has, because Job spoke to God. The friends spoke to Job and only about God. And I think that is an important message in the book of Job, is it's always correct, in a sense, it's always correct to speak to God, how you feel and what's going on. God invites that, God welcomes that. God calls that correct speech. Correct speech is how you feel, what you're thinking, because here's what this is. That's who you are. If you are angry, you are angry. Like, that's who you are. And God always invites the real you into His presence. God could care less about the false you, the fake you, the shadowed you, the fig leaf you. God invites you into His presence. And I think that's what's happening at the end of Job. Is Job spoke correctly because Job spoke to God. And Job spoke to God what was really going on in his life. And that's something we see there. Your heavenly Father always invites and desires for you to talk to him. The real you, the honest you. But this isn't always easy, is it? It's not always easy to talk to God honestly, the real you. And for a variety of reasons, right? One, our theology gets in the way a lot, right? Different theologies. We've said it here for many times. Like what you think about God, what you believe about God is one of the more important things about you because it's the way you will address and approach and come into God, the way you're thinking. Theology matters. Bad theology has consequences. And so theology can sometimes get in the way for you being honest with God. Because, right, you might have some sense or people have said something and you're right and I shouldn't tell God I'm angry with him. He's holy and so theology but I don't want to talk about that sense of how that gets in the way. But another reason that it's not always easy to approach God in the real and honest you is because sometimes we don't know how to deal with or handle our emotions or our feelings, and they get in the way. And how appropriate that the very next book of the Bible following Job is Psalms. And that's what we're in as we read through the Bible in a year as a church, and then that's the messages. The next few weeks, I don't even know how many weeks, it's probably at least 4 or 5 weeks, all of the Old Testament readings are in the book of Psalms. Psalms has always been considered the first prayer book of the church. Psalms is the early church, and it was the Jewish prayer book. This is how they taught prayer. This is the language of prayer. The best place to learn how to pray is through the Psalms. They're unique. They teach people how to talk to God, which again is very appropriate as we're leading out of Job. Walking into God's presence, truly you, as you truly feel who you truly are, and speaking to God honestly. And so, how do you talk to God according to the Psalms? Well, in poetry, right? Who in here likes poetry? All right, can I be honest? It's not always been my favorite. It's not. It's like I want to. I'm one of those guys, I want to like poetry, but sometimes I'll read and I just start bogging down. I do. But poetry is a very unique way of communicating. And see, I think there's all different type of poetry. And even for some of you that don't really like it, I'm sure there's some that you've really enjoyed. There's some poetry, right? Because that really, really abstract stuff, I think that's what gets lost on me. Where you just, you feel like everybody else is lying, right? Like somebody delivers a poem and everyone's like, wow. And you're like you feel like a hidden camera show, like, what? But there is some, I'll call it for my sake, like some simple poetry, right? It's easier to grasp. And I think even for those of you that don't go home and read poetry, awesome. I'm sure there's some poetry that you have heard or read that you really enjoyed, because poetry does have a unique way of communicating. It uses the beauty and rhythm of language to express emotion and vivid images. And it can sometimes share some deeper meanings. It uses different structures and literary devices like metaphor and simile and symbolism. And at its core, poetry distills language down to its most powerful form, allowing complex ideas and feelings to be conveyed in just a few lines. And you know what? It's better to demonstrate it, right, than to just talk about what poetry does. Because see, I can have a moment where I'm feeling a certain way and I can want to convey it, and I can, look my wife in the eyes and I can say, I really like having you in my life. And that's nice, right? I really like having you in my life. Or I can say, I was up all night thinking about you, and this just burst from within the depths of my soul. In the quiet of morning, before the world wakes, your breath is the melody that calms my restless night, the way your laughter dances through the echoes of our home, turns mundane moments into treasures untold. When shadows stretch long, guys, I'm trying to express something, relax. When shadows stretch long and the day feels endless, your presence is a lighthouse guiding me back to warmth. In the tapestry of our days, you are the golden thread, weaving joy into the fabric of every fleeting second. Without a single word, you fill my world with light. And in every heartbeat, I find the comfort of your love. No, that's not. Or I can just say, I really like having you in my life. And I can move on. So poetry does have a place. It takes something and it explodes it, makes it vivid, and it penetrates. It does something. See, that's the best thing we can say, right? Instead of, that it does something to you. And so how do we talk to God and then we're given 150 poems? This creative, vivid image, penetrating language, because it's teaching us something. See, one of the things that gets in the way sometimes is our emotions, our feelings. And the Psalms, poetry, it brings emotions and feelings and it turns up the dial on them. It makes them real and applicable. And it's needed because we don't always know what to do with our feelings. But the one thing we all know is that we do have them. We have them, we experience them. Sometimes we know why we have them, right? Some feelings and emotions are pretty basic. We know, like maybe we have real loss. There's sadness or grief. So sometimes emotions and feelings are pretty basic in the sense that we kind of can very easily connect them to why we are feeling a certain way. But sometimes we aren't quite sure why we have them. Sometimes we're a little confused. Sometimes we may be feeling multiple feelings and emotions and we don't really know how to interpret this. We don't know what to do with it. We're just a little confused. And now take all of that and try to relate it and associate it with God. With how you're thinking about God, how you're thinking about meaning, and how you're thinking about purpose. And we go back, right, on how important it is to speak to God honestly. But what if you're a little confused or you don't know how, and you don't know how to approach God because of the feelings and the emotions? We also get embarrassed to have certain ones. We think some emotions and some feelings are less than, or we shouldn't have them. right? Certain ones make us feel weak or incapable, less than. And we don't like those ones. We have a whole generation, right post-World War II. You had a very unique, wild time in human history. And you had people that had to face down extreme and difficult things coming out of war and coming out of all of these things. And then you have, right, just this re-entry back into like society. And you had a young seminary student at the time who was beginning to recognize like a cultural trend. He was recognizing those that mostly, right, and he was referring mostly to men and returning from World War II, and there was this, he referred to them, I believe, even as like quiet giants. Like they did something heroic, but there was this new sense of stuffing and the inability to share feelings and emotions. And this young seminary student like recognized that, and he began to be worried about the next generation, children who were being modeled no emotion, no feelings. And he began to worry about that. And so he took to a medium that he despised. He said he hated the medium. But he believed God was calling him to be an evangelist to children. And in 1968, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was born and ran for 30 plus years because he wanted to help children understand themselves, and he did it through feelings and emotions, and he took a topic for the day, like, have you been afraid? And he started placing back the value that, you know what? To have no emotions is to not be human. Because emotions and feelings are a part of us. It's who we are. Life without emotion is not human. But right, you have your extremes. Life with uncontrolled, unhindered emotions just with the steering wheel of your life, that's not a great replacement either. But how do you have life where you have emotions and feelings and they're in their right place? And again, this is where the Psalms help us. The Psalms help us. Human emotion is turned up, but the whole model of what is happening in the Psalms is all about praying through your feelings. Not acting as though you don't have them, but accessing them and praying through them. And somehow in this process, feelings are always, there's this sense in the Psalms that feelings are always kind of brought back into that healthy place. The Psalms model this for us. The Psalms are pretty honest. If you haven't read them in a while, I challenge you. That's what we'll be reading for the next couple of weeks. Pick up your Bible and read a psalm a day. Read through some of the Psalms. The Psalms can be brutally honest and shocking sometimes. But there's something about bringing that into your prayer life, bringing that to God, offering what's going on to God. Something happens. If you read some of your Psalms this week, I wanted to just bring out something really quick about this raw honesty. If you've ever noticed, this may be fun for some of you. It doesn't, but in thinking about bringing yourself to the Lord in honesty, going through the Psalms and maybe just reading like the first verse. and seeing like how a psalm begins. You know, you got kind of known that Psalm 1 and 2 are kind of an introduction to all of the Psalms, but then in Psalms 3 we kind of jump in, right? Verse 1, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me, and many are saying to me, there is no help for you in God. It just jumps in. What is going on? This is a Psalm of David. This is a Psalm of David when he's being run out of his kingdom, and people are coming all around and they're trying to kill him. And how? So teaching you how to pray. What is David feeling right at that moment? Right? I got foes all around me. People are trying to kill me. I don't know what's going on. That's a great prayer if that's what's going on. Just beginning with that. See, sometimes we begin so formally. There's nothing wrong with having some routine and rhythm in your prayer life. But don't also think that that's all it is, where it's like, oh, Heavenly Father. Like, no, God! They're trying to kill me. If they are trying to kill you, I don't know. Psalm 4, look at the first verse. Answer me when I call, O God of my right. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. Answer me. Where are you? Psalm 5. Give ear to my words, O Lord, and give heed to my sighing. Listen to the sound of my cry. Psalm 6. O Lord, don't rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me. I'm languishing. Heal my bones. My soul is struck with terror. Psalm 7. O Lord my God, in you I take refuge. Save me from all those trying to pursue me, and deliver me, or the lion's going to tear me apart. Psalm 10, why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Have you felt that one before? But does our religiosity teach us not to begin that way? God, why are you so far from me? Why are you not speaking to me? Why is it that I'm going to church Sunday after Sunday and trying to read my Bible and talking to you, and I just don't sense you or hear you or feel you anywhere? Why are you so distant from me? I'm really bothered by this. Psalm 12. Help! Great prayer, right? One Christian author said she had two prayers in life. Her two main prayers in life were, help, 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 and thank you, thank you, thank you. Her two go-to prayers. Help, O Lord, for there is no longer anyone who is godly. Listen how that one's beginning. Help! I look around and there's just injustice there, and there's lies over here, and what are these people doing over here? Like, what are you doing, God? Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, again, will you forget me and hide your face from me? Now, you don't have to start that way. This is not the model that, okay, I need to... It's not some formula in that sense. But what you're seeing here is this raw, honest emotion and feeling, and it being the gateway into the conversation with God. It's saying tomorrow morning, if you want to pray, how about wake up and stop for 20 seconds? Quiet yourself and ask yourself and discern, like how actually is it with me right now? How do I feel? What is going on? And see where you're at and use that as your launching pad. Because maybe you're feeling really at peace, right? You're feeling really at peace, and have a sense of joy and a sense of pep in your step. And then like a Psalms 8, right? Oh Lord, oh sovereign, how majestic is your name. In all the earth you have glory. Maybe that's how you're feeling. See, the psalmist felt that way, and he jumped in right there. But maybe you're feeling a different way. And I'm telling you, there is something that happens when you actually survey your soul and you walk into the presence knowing that God invites you, however you're feeling, whoever you are. And that's who he gives audience to. God gives audience to the real you, not really the fake you. But there's something about bringing that honesty to God. Because if we go back to those same Psalms, and you see here the one where it says, answer me when I call to you. But Psalms 4 ends with, I will lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety. There's something that happens in the midst of praying when you're really being honest. There's this conversion, I think, that happens. Psalms 5, give ear to my words, O Lord. Listen to the sound of my cry. And it goes through, but by the very last verse, for you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover them with favor as with a shield. There's this shifting that happens as you're walking into the presence of God with all of who you are. Oh Lord, my God, in you I take refuge. Save me from the pursuers. The lion, they're going to tear me. But by the end of that psalm, David is saying, I will give to the Lord the thanks due to his righteousness and sing his praise. Psalms 10, why, O Lord, do you stand so far off, and why are you hiding yourself? That's how the psalmist begins, but at the very end, O Lord, you will hear the desire of the meek. You will strengthen the heart. You will incline your ear. You will do justice. There's something that happens. Psalms 13, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? But in the end of that psalm, but I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. See, it's an amazing thing when you track some of these psalms. How there's that moment, there's that outburst, there's that raw passion and energy that really is there and approaches God, but that through praying through that, see, because we don't want raw, untamed feelings and emotions like governing our life. We don't want that. You don't want to see necessarily, and go out for the day and just meet somebody with, what? Or nobody listens to me. Like you don't want the feelings and emotions to just run your life. And what I would say is the best way that feelings and emotions, you find yourself in them, is bringing them to God. Where it's not an anesthetic, it doesn't do away with them, but I believe it always sets them in the proper perspective of life. And we see that again and again. Just read your Psalms. Pay attention to how they begin. Pay attention to what's being said. Look at how they end. And it's not a perfect formula. They're not always like that. But it's amazing that we have Psalms like I believe Psalm 137, right? That's the famous. You have what's called the imprecatory Psalms. And that's the angry Psalms. And theologians for the longest have not known what to do with these Psalms. right? Because, it's the Bible, it's God's word, it's all so we take a very generic idea of what the Bible means. If there's a verse in there, that's just some bound by truth verse, and so you have a psalm where it says, and go take that enemy's baby and crush its head on rocks. And you're like, whoa, David, or whoa, exile, you don't know what to do with that. And theologians have always why is that in the Bible? But when you step back, why is it in the Bible? Because that's how the individual felt. And the individual was just laying it out, the prayer book, the poems, the language of talking to God. That means that if you are filled with hate and vengeance and anger, if there is one that you can go to and lay it all out on how you feel, it's your Heavenly Father. Doesn't mean what you're saying is true. That's not the point of prayer and conversation with your friend. The way that we go about being shaped, informed, right? Have you ever heard of the idea of being an internal processor or an external processor, right? Part of the formation of prayer is giving voice to things that are in you, and there is that process and that formation that happens. And maybe right when you're praying and you're saying, and God, you need to just kill him, and maybe you then hear yourself, yeah, whoa. Yeah, I didn't know that was in there. Whoa, hold on. Maybe you yourself say, yeah, wow, I didn't know I was that angry. It's not sanctifying everything you say in prayer. It's just simply going to God with who you truly are. And that God invites that. And that God welcomes that. And that somewhere, somehow, there's that mystery involved in it, that God uses it to form us. God invites the wrestling match. That's the previous book, the book of Job. Last week we talked rules for wrestling with God. To be honest, to be real. There's another one that wrestled with God. Jacob, the God of Jacob. I'll say this, God likes a good wrestling match. And don't shy away from a wrestling match if that's what you need. God invites a good wrestling match every now and then. And what happens in good wrestling matches? We'll look at the life of Jacob, right? A good wrestling match with God welcomes identity and intimacy and blessing. God invites that. God welcomes that. The God of Jacob delights to wrestle with you. And I would say that involves feelings, emotions. There is something about being drawn in and being able to be real with God. And so, as we kind of come to a close in this service, I wanted to end our service a little bit differently today. Like I said, tomorrow, maybe when you wake up. But I want to actually do that right now. I want to give some space in here today for you to be honest with God. Now we're here at church and there's people all around. And so it might be difficult to really be angry with God or to really be whatever you're feeling with God. But just quietly. Ask yourself, what's going on? Ask yourself, what are you really thinking and feeling? What is really bothering you? What is going on in your life? And use that. And quietly jump off into some prayer. Maybe it's about the world. Maybe it's everybody in here could be a little different. So it's not, I'm mentioning anger. I might not be angry at God, but maybe you just are so confused. Maybe you watch more news than maybe you should. Who knows? I don't know. And maybe you're just confused. Maybe sometimes you want to take a strong position, but then you come back and you're like, God, I don't get it. And then that confusion is brought with God, right? Like, what are you doing, God? Or maybe you notice some insecurity. Maybe you really grab a hold of strong conviction and truth because the idea of, if you're a little bit more unsure, that makes you very insecure. And so maybe you're actually a little bit more fearful and insecure because you don't know how it all works as outwardly you claim you do. And you go, oh wow, I'm actually a little anxious and unsure about how to factor God into all this. So you peel back and you find hidden some other feelings and emotions, and we go to secondary ones and secondary actions, and we cover up, and we actually do a pretty decent job of deceiving ourselves. But God invites the real you. And God works with and transforms the real you. And so we're just going to close with a few minutes of silence, and then we'll move in to just our final song. But during this silence and during the next few moments, survey your soul. And then take what you discover and bring that into the presence of God. And maybe with your eyes closed right now, I invite you to consider one last thing. Whatever you may have discovered, whatever feeling, whatever emotion is at the surface, whatever thought, whatever's happening right now, I want you to picture right now Jesus coming in to your space wherever you are, looking at you in the face And what is it that you hear Jesus saying to you right now? What does he want you to know to be true?